Well, good afternoon, everybody. This is Chris Frew with BioBuzz. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of What's the Buzz. This is episode 55, and I'm honored to be joined by Joy Polefrone from who is the Regional Innovation Officer, which is such a cool title, by the way, uh, for the Alliance for Building Better Medicine. Joy, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much, Chris. It's great to be here. Thanks for inviting us on. We're really happy to be here.
Yeah, my pleasure. We're excited to talk today. For those of you who are just joining, What's the Buzz is our opportunity to talk to ecosystem builders in the life sciences space. And we do that because we know how important it is to have the village around you when you're trying to, take your medicines to market or build better medicines. And the village is important. And I think the ecosystem builders that help support the companies and innovators do such an important job. And we want the opportunity to showcase that and also make sure that the people that are building medicines and innovating and developing know what's around and the resources available. So we do this usually 2 or 3 times a month, and the program is supported by I like to say, an actual ecosystem builder. So Heffron and Company is our annual sponsor for What's the Buzz. Heffron and Company is a mechanical engineering and services firm specializing in life sciences and complex industries. So they've developed and been part of some of the most iconic life science buildings, top FOIA, if you're familiar with ISP and FOIA awards, buildings such as AstraZeneca, and in Maryland we have the iconic Human Genome Sciences, which they had a huge part in, as well as hospitals and other complex infrastructures. So couldn't be more grateful to Colin and the whole Heffron team. They're a 104-year-old company, so they've been doing this quite a while. Definitely a team you can trust and looks at this through a patient mindset. So thank you to Heffron for all you do to be the physical ecosystem builder that we all need. So Joy, why don't we start off, for those of people joining the program today that aren't familiar with your organization, tell us a little bit about the organization and kind of the mission and a little bit more about what you do.
Super. Yeah, happy to. So the Alliance for Building Better Medicine is, I often just call it the Alliance, and some people call it ABBM because it's a long title. But it was established about 5 years ago to create a regional biopharmaceutical ecosystem centered around a resilient drug supply. And at the outset, its origin story comes from a handful of people in the Richmond metro area who noticed that we have a set of unique assets, that if we brought those unique assets together, we had the capacity to accelerate the development of capabilities to reshore and scale medicine manufacturing in the US. And so the Alliance started out initially as about 12 partner organizations, a really classic place-based economic development initiative. And even before that, there was a group that came together to develop a strategic plan through funding from Go Virginia, our regional economic development partner, to establish that strategy. How might we build this regional biopharmaceutical ecosystem? And we were really fortunate in that the Build Back Better Regional Challenge happened to coincide with the publishing of that strategic plan. And so as a community, we were able to go after the funds to be able to secure additional resources and really accelerate the pace of development of this vision into reality here in the Richmond-Petersburg MSA. And at the outset, we were really focused on the resiliency of the medicine supply. So thinking about essential medicines and the capabilities to manufacture generic medicines in the United States. But over time, as we started to unpack some of the challenges of developing a scalable, sustainable ecosystem with the density and diversity necessary to be able to sort of survive ups and downs of the economic windfalls, and a really global ecosystem when it comes to medicine supply, we realized also both that and the workforce that we need to be able to scale and sustain this ecosystem. We really needed to be thinking about both the innovator medicines and the medicines that are generics, which 90% of Americans take every day. And so between those two things, over the last 5 years, we've continued to evolve and shapeshift into an organization that is really centering that community of builders together, the ecosystem play of a community of builders together. and moved away from solely focused on resiliency of generic medicines to really think about how do we make sure that medicines that are invented here stay, scale, and grow here to create a sustainable ecosystem for medicine manufacturing in the US.
Yeah, that's incredible. And I love the evolution, right? So I think it's so great. So many great things start as you mentioned community a bunch of times. So many great things that end up becoming very big and successful start when there's like community alignment. And it's great to see that community is evolving as I'm sure you're learning a lot, but also as macroeconomically, we're seeing evolutions.
Yeah.
Now more than ever, you brought up advanced manufacturing, right? We're seeing a lot out of Washington, especially about how important advanced manufacturing is to the U.S. in this global competition now we're in with China and other areas. So this kind of this ecosystem support is so critical.
Yes, it absolutely is. And I think it requires and necessitates a diversity of partners because no one organization has the capacity to hold all the pieces. From what you said earlier around physical infrastructure all the way through to workforce and talent. And then I think there's this image that I think maybe collectively got that we were really focused on the medicines, but ultimately to be able to create and manufacture and scale medicine production here in the US, it is also a robotics and AI and machine learning play as well. So it really requires that we look at all of the assets that we can pull together to focus on the particular problem we're solving, not necessarily the solution that we might have thought was the answer to everything in the beginning. So it also requires this iterative design thinking kind of capability set that may or may not exist in most of these organizations historically.
And it's hard to pull that together in an ecosystem fashion. Maybe, Joy, could you unpack a little bit for us and our listeners? What is the value that happens and when the ecosystem is aligned? And you mentioned infrastructure. Are partners sharing infrastructure, like real physical infrastructure? Is it, could you unpack a little bit that, like the value layer that you're stacking there?
Yeah, and I've got a good example that feels really timely. So about a year ago, almost exactly a year ago, we had a conversation around how might we stitch together the physical assets into a process for manufacturing end-to-end medicines here in the Richmond MSA. So we've had investments from the federal government in physical assets. So building out the capabilities to make medicines with advanced manufacturing technology at scale here. So making active pharmaceutical ingredients. Think of them as like a step in the process. Mm-hmm. We have partners here in the region who have been doing work in sourcing and manufacturing key starting materials using new chemistry to make those active pharmaceutical ingredients. And then we have invested dollars that went into the building of a finished dose formulation facility that Civica has here in the region. So we've got Occam systems in the key starting material space. We've got Flow that's been building and scaling the capability for advanced manufacturing here in the API space. And then we've got Civica that has built a best-in-class facility for high switching potential for medicine manufacturing and finished dose formulation. And they're particularly cool because they also have partnerships. I mean, to me, they're all cool, but they're particularly cool because they've developed a business model where they have direct to hospital relationships in being able to ensure those hospitals that they'll have a supply of the medicines that they believe might be in shortage in the future. So they've got a different business model in how they go to market. And a year and a half ago, when we were in sort of early conversations around what next for the region based on those assets that have been invested in over time through federal, state, and local investments, the what next was how do we stitch that end-to-end capability together? And in the fall, when EDA came out with another call for proposals for implementation funding for our tech hub, that was one of the projects we were able to pull off the shelf because we were coordinated enough, aligned about the need and the opportunity, and clear that these partners already had existing relationships that had been built over time. The discussions happened, sort of preliminarily in June of last year. And so in the fall, when that notice of funding was released, we were ready to pull that project off the shelf and bring it to life. And that project moved from, and phase 1 to a second stage in, let's call it late December. It was like Christmas Eve, I think we learned that, to move forward into the second stage of funding. And what it means is that we can be quite agile and opportunistic around funding opportunities because we've already been in deep relationship and communication and coordination across those partners. What's behind that project is 5 years of coordinated work in workforce and talent system development, in how are we building together and partnering across different project spaces. That is not just about that single project, but is about tens of projects that have been running across these partners, more than 50 that have been working together and are continuing to work together to pull different projects off the shelf. And so it's a really relationally based set of activities. But for earlier project work that we had done where we figured out, how do we work together? Really quite literally, who's on first, who's on second? How do we create teaming agreements early that help people to feel comfortable about ways of working and relationships, so that when those opportunities come to life, we're ready to be able to, lock arms and go after them together.
It sounds to me like there's a, because there's a chicken and egg thing, right? And we've talked to a lot of different ecosystems, and the EDA funding is attractive, and there's other NSF fundings, and but I see a lot of organizations that see the funding, then come together and try to find a proposal or find a fit. I don't, there's levels of success on that. It sounds like you guys are. It sounds like there was a different kind of inception for the Alliance or in the Greater Petersburg area. Maybe could you elaborate? How did that start? Was there someone who provoked, and someone like a ringleader that was like, hey, this is a thing, or really like an alignment around mission? Where did the inception kind of really come from that enabled that proactivity?
Yeah. This is a story that I've heard a couple of people tell a couple of different ways. And sometimes the story involves a conversation in a parking lot about how might we. But ultimately, I think what it comes back to is a handful of individuals who had seen a lot of what was happening here in this region, had a lot of passion around the problem statement, and really said, it's not about building an economic development project. It's about building access to medicines. And so what I consistently see and hear in the themes of every person that's working across this space is that tether back to mission that is about making sure that we have the capacity to have access to medicines here. And so Civica's work around developing a new business model and a new cost structure for affordable insulin that really reshaped a lot of the market dynamics in insulin medicine, access. I think that's one piece of the story, so that for people in Petersburg who maybe are looking at opportunities to careers in Civica or at Civica, are excited about the prospect of being able to manufacture medicine that might help one of their family members have access to affordable insulin when they need it. I think the other piece of it for me early on, when I didn't quite know enough about medicine shortages and the real criticality of the problem that we're trying to solve here, is going into a CVS and trying to get children's Tylenol, and none of it being on the shelves. And I think that as Americans, including myself, who has a degree in chemistry, one would think I would have known something about this. I don't think we realize the prevalence of the challenge and how much the offshoring of medicine manufacturing over the last 50, 60 years has created a dynamic that, as individuals living in this country, just like individuals living in the African subcontinent or in Germany, there are a lot of spaces in the world where we've realized, wow, our supply chain is extremely distributed. And when there are issues with supply chain durability, or we have a global pandemic, we run into a realization that has been forming over many years that access to things that we depend on, like for me, an albuterol inhaler, becomes a real concern. And so I think that it's that mission element, it's the ability to create access to medicines near and far. And I think more recently, for me, who has like a really strong tether to innovation, it's how do we make sure that those entrepreneurs, the individuals identifying new medicines, have the capacity to scale and manufacture their innovations into companies here in the US too. It's not to say at the exclusion of the rest of the world, it's to say here too. And that's a very important part of the equation.
Yeah, I love that, and I love the grounding in the mission from inception through. It sounds like every decision that you guys you continue to make through the alliance. The alliance is also very grounded. You mentioned this early in workforce, right? And at being part, we talk a lot about how workforce is a critical infrastructure, and I think that needs, we think that needs to be even stronger, more of a stronger emphasis, in Washington and across. So, can you tell us about how you've approached the workforce equation, and in order to the demand for your partners, in order to really position, the greater Petersburg area for being able to accomplish like this great feat that you're working towards?
Yeah, yeah. It's we were talking a little earlier in that like part of my background was I joke a little bit of a rotational experience in HR leadership and HR strategy. And one of the things that I learned early on in one of my last roles at Philips was the value of a strategic workforce plan as part of a business strategy. That like it's really important that you know where the workforce needs are going, and how you're going to address that in line with your innovation strategy. And as someone who had spent years prior to that in innovation strategy, it's just sort of, it all kind of has crystallized in the work that we're doing here in this ecosystem, that it's not, it's really hard to understand how critical some of the capabilities of a combination of art and science are in the science industry. So I think about, the types of capabilities that I gained by doing a graduate degree in chemistry in a mass spectrometry lab that had me working with really advanced techniques. And that's something that graduating from my PhD at the University of Virginia I defended in the fall of 2006, there weren't companies here in Virginia where I could go down the road and continue my experience and exploration of science, especially if I was interested in not being in a lab for the remainder of my career. There were a lot of opportunities to work, sort of in maybe a manufacturing facility in Elkton, but there weren't necessarily a density of opportunities available in Virginia. And there's a lot of folks who have boomeranged back to Virginia who have talked about that absence of density, and part of the challenge of that. And so we have a really robust workforce coming out of our academic institutions in Virginia, from the community college all the way through to postdoctoral degrees. And we have our postdoctoral training. And I think what we didn't have was a density historically. And what that means for Virginia is that a lot of our talent leaves Virginia and goes to, the coast and the Northeast and California, and the West Coast, and even south to North Carolina to find jobs in the industry. And so without that density, it creates a pretty big gap. And so when we were first starting the work of the Alliance, one of the things that was part of that original Go Virginia funded strategic plan was an investment in an end-to-end stackable credential pathway, in order to be able to go from dual degree, dual enrollment programs all the way through the nation's only PhD in pharmaceutical manufacturing to postdoctoral research. And what we realized, and the team realized, this is really predates me, is that it's very critical that we're thinking about on-ramps and off-ramps into careers in this industry, that somebody could do some work in a dual enrollment program, go and get a good job, and then move back into an educational experience to then further their learning and their skill set. What we also benefit a lot from was that first Build Back Better Regional Challenge tranche of funding, which allowed us to create that end-to-end pathway in advanced pharmaceutical manufacturing, which doesn't exist anywhere else in the world. And that capability set to, go from high school all the way through to lifelong learning with stackable credentials that stitch together. The thing that's been really cool to me, well, there's a bunch of things in workforce. One of the things that's been really cool to me is to lift our heads up and look across the country and say, where are best practices and what should we be doing here that maybe we're learning from other parts of the country. And one of the best practices that we learned about was a program out of Indiana called Ascend Indiana. And they're a workforce intermediary that works in a very concentrated way with their business partners. It's very much industry led to ask the question of like, what are the competencies and capabilities that you need of the innovation future for this industry to continue to grow and thrive here? And so when we were in the process of building a strategy for workforce, so Build Back Better was running, we were saying, okay, like what's next? What are the next things we should be doing in workforce and talent system? We were tapped to participate in a program through America Achieves, where we got a line of sight into all of these different best practices in the US and in the world. And we were one of, I think it was 10 of regions that came together to look at that. And we built a workforce strategy. And one of the pieces of that strategy was to build an intermediary. And so when the Good Jobs Challenge grant was available for us to apply for a year and a half ago, we took that particular strategy off the shelf and we said, okay, we're going to apply for funding to build an intermediary. So it's been almost 2 years ago that we put that application in. So we were able to secure Good Jobs Challenge funding for a slice of that intermediary. So we're doing a pilot to scale with a focus on the technical degrees. And our focus there is how do you, again, create that sustainable ecosystem of partners in the workforce and talent space where you have, as much as you can, a closed feedback loop between industry and the partners who are developing programming and talent. Because ultimately, the way I see it, especially coming from my time at Philips, is that talent is one of our customers. You know, if we're building an innovation ecosystem, we want talent to stay in Virginia, to feel that they can grow in Virginia and has an opportunity to boomerang back to Virginia if they decide that where they want to go is outside the US or into other parts of the country for their career trajectory. We also need to stay very attuned to the fact that industry is one of our customers. And as we're thinking about building out a workforce and talent system that's end-to-end, that's robust, that has the capabilities to really leapfrog into the future of what the industry is moving towards through things like strategic workforce planning, we absolutely have to be thinking about those two customers as partners. And so we're in, sort of that iterative conversation. And in the fall of last year, it was announced that we were getting investment to Virginia and building a Virginia Advanced Pharmaceutical Manufacturing Workforce Center. And really, when we look at that as a community, we've really come to see that as a network. Because ultimately, we're building a lot of these pieces, and we started with this seed in the Richmond-Petersburg MSA, which we've also now created partnerships with the Roanoke, Blacksburg area, as well as with Charlottesville, Albemarle, and then slowly learning from what's been happening in the Tidewater area and a lot of their work in workforce to ensure that we're bringing some of these networked capabilities of the 5 biohubs of Virginia, including George Mason and Northern Virginia, together into a conversation around how do we create pathways so that we're not trying to replicate what North Carolina has been doing, but we're learning from their best practices. We're learning from the best practices in Indiana and in California and other places and saying, how might we bring together those assets in a way where we're really centering talent and industry to continue to iteratively build a workforce of the future in this industry.
I love the collaborative approach. And again, I think every ecosystem needs to identify what's unique about what's their DNA and what's unique. So I think the foresight of like not replicating, but embracing what works and applying it to what your goals and your mission are there in Virginia. I love the Virginia collaboration. I'll tell you, everybody I talk to in Virginia is like, go Virginia, like not go Charlottesville or go Petersburg. And I just want to say I love that. I think that's an incredible superpower that is been part of Virginia's success over the past couple of years. And so I'd love for you to comment on that. I mean, you mentioned the $120 million workforce program that like Merck and Eli Lilly and AZ contributed to. But yeah, I mean, just where you are, I mean, Eli Lilly announced their advanced manufacturing and their, was it $6 billion, I think, investment. So that's a huge acknowledgement for the infrastructure that you've built that a large company will commit to that. So maybe could you talk a little bit about that, like from how you see it through the Alliance, like, as an emerging player in the life science pharmaceutical, what is it? What are the things that you're doing different that you're seeing this this tremendous success, over the past couple of years with?
Yeah. It's a great question. And I think that like on the surface it could just be timing, but that's actually not true. If you look, I joke that you see a duck or a goose swimming across a pond and you don't see how fast their feet are moving underneath the pond. But in the seat that I sit in, I get to see how fast the ducks are actually moving and how hard they're working. I mean, we have tremendous distributed assets that are all connected and collaborative. We were at a presentation to a visiting group maybe a month ago now, and they commented that we all were like walking up and giving each other hugs and like really happy to see each other, like friends who see each other regularly. And I think that is actually a big part of the special sauce in Virginia, is that it's not lip service. It's really a strong set of distributed capabilities. Like, we have a tremendous investment that the VEDP has done over the last number of years of concentrating some of their capabilities in key industry verticals, this being one of them. And so I'm regularly on a text thread back and forth with my partners over there around different things that they're working through and on, where we're in constant collaboration. So whether it's email or a phone call, or running into each other at an event, or planning like day-long working sessions together, where we're figuring out how might we consistently and continuously bring the best of Virginia together so that we can answer whatever that current problem space is. I mean, yeah, my husband laughs sometimes because he's like, "You sound like you're such a cheerleader for what we're doing," and I am, because I believe so wholeheartedly that when we do lock arms and we recognize that the work that's happening at the Fralin Biotechnology Research Institute is extremely complementary to what's happening at the Manning Center in Charlottesville and what's happening to Medicines for All here in the Richmond region, and that those capabilities complement what's happening in the Tidewater area and complement what's happening in Northern Virginia. And that as we start to think about what we're really good at, and that's from the regional perspective, but it's also from the organizational perspective, I should not be an economic development role. That should not be my role. We have tremendous talent at VEDP in doing that work. We have tremendous talent at GRP here in the Richmond region and VGR south in Petersburg and the Tri-Cities. They should be in those swim lanes. And instead of trying to like build something on top and make it top heavy and hierarchical, the Alliance has really said, nope, the people who are great at the work in their swim lanes are going to lead those swim lanes, and they're going to drive those initiatives forward. And we're going to do the best that we can to be the coordinator and aligner and the integrator of a shared strategy, because you can't expect all of them to hold all of the pieces of a shared strategy. They need to own theirs, and then they can tell us what those are. And we can then work together to create a strategy that integrates those, so that somebody said this recently, Mark Esser at the Manning Institute, and I love it. He said that eventually, if we work together in the way that we are, the sum of the parts will be greater than the whole. Meaning, people always say the whole is greater than the sum of the parts, but if we do our job well, each of those individual parts will have greater capabilities and assets and opportunities than they had before we started all working together. And I love that because I've seen it happen. And I think we're still, despite the success, we're still at quite a tipping point of opportunity for what Virginia can actually do and be in this space. And I'm excited to look back, I hope, in 20 or 30 years and talk about like, gosh, I remember that conversation that I had with Chris. And I remember how much I didn't know how great we could be as we continue to lock arms and work together.
What a great vision to sit back and think about where you'll be in a couple decades. I love that statement from Mark too. I mean, that embraces our ethos at BioBuzz. We call it hierarchy over hierarchy, and the whole concept that the nodes are greater than the institution or itself, and we're working to build a community powered organization, and it embraces some of that same philosophy that you guys are talking about. Is like, you have to understand what everybody's role is and what their special, capabilities are and where they should be, and enable people to thrive in doing that. And I guess for your role as the aligner, like, I guess Alliance for Building Better Medicine really truly fits what that role is the alliance builder. And yeah. Well, I guess as we wrap up here, I want to, I want to ground in something that, that I know is important to you, is like kind of mission and kind of the end result that you're all working for. When you do, I know you were just visualizing it in your head a moment ago, but when you think back, when you think about a couple generations from now, what is it that you hope that, they look back at this moment that you're working on and see that the Alliance was able to accomplish?
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, I'm a bonus mom of two kids, and one just turned 10 this weekend, the other's 14. And when I was working in Philips and we were doing global footprint projects, one of the things that was always hard for me was this sense of like, how in the United States are we creating a pathway and a forward momentum to great jobs for kids and communities so that people feel like there is a reciprocality to the existence of a company in your backyard? That it's not like there's an extractive element of it, but that there really is this sense of community and integration. And when I look at the cultures of AstraZeneca and Lilly and Merck. And I've worked in healthcare my entire career, and I've worked in or with, a variety of different companies, especially when I was at a foundation or working across many. And what I love about healthcare and health tech and pharma in general, life sciences and biotech, is that I do think most people who are drawn to it are drawn to it because they want to be of impact and purpose in the world. And I think that, like, what I hope I can look back and say is that our two kids grew up in an environment that felt like it was nourishing and sustaining and reciprocal in its growth. That it wasn't just coming into Virginia and moving out, but it was coming in, it was putting down roots in the community, it was understanding the history, that these companies start to feel like Virginia is really home and it's a place where they want to grow deeper and wider roots. And that we see an increased density of the larger companies here. But more interesting, even to me, that we have a lot of entrepreneurs that start to see themselves in this industry in all of the adjacent spaces, like building tech. You think about the companies who are building these buildings here, the manufacturing facilities. Over 5 years, the AI and robotics technology is going to be new by the time they open their doors. And so just this idea that there's a lot of entrepreneurs, there's a lot of organic, creative capabilities that could contribute to this industry, and that all of them feel a sense of belonging and inclusion in their community, that they want to continue to contribute in a reciprocal way. Like, I hope that that's what it feels like. I don't know what it'll look like, but I hope that it feels that way. And that my 10 and 14-year-old are like, yeah, this is a place I want to live. This is the kind of environment I want to be a part of building. Yeah.
That's incredible. Well, I can see, and I'm sure all of our listeners and those tuning in can see why you're leading the Alliance, Joy. Your passion really comes through, and I love the kind of, your why is clearly to build a better place for the future generations and the people that need it. So thank you for everything you do. And I've really enjoyed this. I haven't been down to Richmond since the Eli Lilly announcement, but I know I really got to make some more trips down there. And that was very evident based on this conversation that I got to be down there more.
We would love to have you come visit. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. Next week, I hope you will join in. One of those Alliance partners, Activation Capital. I'll have Mike Steele on the program. So we'll get a couple weeks in a row of greater Richmond buzz, if you will.
Awesome.
So I have Mike on the program, talk about Activation Capital's role in the tremendous things that you all are doing. But thank you for sharing the Alliance story and again, all the great work you're doing. It's really incredible.
Thank you. Thanks again for the opportunity. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Well, thank you all for tuning in today. Again, tune in next week for more on Virginia with Mike Steele at Activation Capital. And thanks again to our awesome sponsors at Heffron for helping to make this possible and give us the opportunity to talk to incredible people like Joy every week and support the ecosystem building work being done all across the country. So until next week, thank you all for tuning in. It's Chris with